Hello there, fellow students. Welcome back. Today in this video lecture, we're going to shift our focus, our study of world history, into the next phase, what's known as the Third Wave Era. So for convenience sake, historians like to take world history and divide it up into neat eras or ages that share common characteristics. And history is way too complicated to always divide it up into these neat categories, and the timelines often overlap and it's never that convenient. But nevertheless, by looking at history this way, it gives us kind of a convenient way to organize our study of it. So before we look at the characteristics of the Third Wave Era, let's quickly review the earlier epochs that we studied. We began by looking at the impact of humans evolving from the Paleolithic Age into the Neolithic Age. And the key here is the beginnings of farming, or to use a fancier term, agriculture. Now this period lasted roughly from about 10,000 BCE to 3000 BCE, and during the Paleolithic or Old Stone Age, humans mostly lived a hunting and gathering lifestyle. This meant that they often traveled around looking for food, and they lived in relatively smaller communities. Now during this period, these small communities were largely egalitarian, which means that they did not divide themselves into a lot of social classes, and men and women enjoyed sort of a relative equality. But then during the Neolithic or New Stone Age, humans learned how to farm. And since they had to tend to their crops and guard their food source, they became more sedentary, which means they settled down and started to establish more permanent villages. And then that gets us into the next period that we call the First Wave Civilizations. The First Wave era lasted about 3500 BCE to 600 BCE, and it's characterized by the beginnings of larger, advanced civilizations. And these civilizations almost always began near river valleys. And because you can't grow food without fresh water, you can't live without fresh water, so that makes perfect sense. The most well-known of these civilizations were the Mesopotamia Civilization near the Tigris and Euphrates River, an area that's also called the Fertile Crescent. We looked at the Nile River Civilization in Egypt, the Indus River Civilization in present-day Pakistan, and the Yellow River Civilization in China. And by the way, the real name of the Yellow River is the Huanghe River, so you might see that in a textbook as well. And civilizations shared a number of characteristics that we need to keep in mind, including a system of government, some way to organize the people, a system of writing such as cuneiform or hieroglyphics, and in Mesopotamia, Hammurabi's Code represents both of these achievements. Advanced civilizations also had monumental architecture such as the pyramids of Egypt, or some other type of public works such as irrigation systems, which archaeologists find evidence of in India, in the cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Another trait that we begin to see in advanced civilizations is the beginnings of social and gender inequality. In advanced civilizations, perhaps this was due to the beginnings of job specialization, began to develop these social hierarchies in a very patriarchal or male-dominated society. Then, beginning around roughly 600 BCE and lasting to roughly 600 CE, we enter what is often called the Second Wave Era. During the Second Wave Era, we start to see the development of larger empires as civilizations began to conquer and consolidate other civilizations and become empires. Well known among these were the Han Empire of China, the Persian Empire, the Maurya and Gupta empires in India. In Greece, although it was not considered an empire, at least not until Alexander the Great conquered much of Eurasia and spread what is known as Hellenistic culture, it was still an advanced civilization worthy of second wave status. The Roman Empire also thrived during this era. And these empires were known for very important achievements, and many enjoyed what we call a golden age, until many of them, for a variety of reasons, began to decline. Another important aspect of these second wave civilizations was the growth and spread of many of the world's religions and philosophies. Although Hinduism began earlier than this in India, Buddhism began as an alternative to Hinduism in India and spread into China. In China, three important philosophies began to emerge: legalism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and that shaped a lot of their government and society. In Greece, rationalism began to replace religion as a way of looking at the world and answering important questions about life and the world. And this is why we spend some time talking about philosophers such as Socrates and Plato, and mathematicians such as Pythagoras and others. And in the Persian Empire, we see the beginnings of monotheistic religions, which will eventually come to dominate much of the Western world. Now this brings us to the Third Wave era, which lasted roughly between 600 and 1450. Now notice that since we are now in the Common Era, we no longer have to differentiate between BCE and CE, so that's a relief. So three main things will be our focus for this Third Wave era. And the first is the emergence of brand new civilizations and empires, including the Islamic religion and empire, which dominated the Middle East, North Africa, and even a good chunk of Europe for a while. A Germanic empire emerged in the old Western Roman Empire of Europe, and the Russian Empire started to emerge to the east, and, wait for it, the Mongols. The second characteristic was the restructuring of earlier civilizations. Although the Han Dynasty in China fell, other dynasties rose to replace it. In Mesoamerica, we studied and talked about the Mayan civilization, and they declined, but the Aztecs came to dominate what was once Mayan civilization. And further to the south, in the Andes Mountains of South America, the Incas established an empire. And although the Western Roman Empire fell, the eastern part of the empire became the Byzantine Empire, and they were doing fine until they were eventually conquered. The third characteristic of the Third Wave era, and this is a very important one, was that the world started to get a lot busier and interactions among civilizations accelerated. Much of this was due to increased global trade, as important trade networks began to emerge, such as the Silk Road and Indian Ocean networks in Eurasia, and even a thriving Saharan trade network in Africa. So trade and interaction meant a lot more cultural diffusion, meant a lot more interaction amongst civilizations, and that's going to have very important results, or very important impacts. And of course, we still see evidence in the Third Wave era of earlier themes that we talked about, such as patriarchy, state building, and social inequalities. Those things never seem to go away. So that's part 3 in a nutshell. This era covers several chapters in the Strayer textbook, and as we go on, we'll get into a bit more detail as we read more. So, happy studying. Hope you're excited about the Third Wave era. I hope you're as excited as I am. Okay, we'll see you in class.